'Twas a tale of two halves in Lincoln on Saturday night in Nebraska's victory over the Colorado Buffaloes. But I think it says something about Matt Rhule, and I think it maybe says something about what he's building at Nebraska, where maybe they don't play their best, most complete 60-minute game, and they still look pretty darn dominant under the lights against the Buffaloes.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
You know, if you turn this game off at the end of the first half, you probably think I'm coming on here saying, Nebraska, the hype train rolled into Lincoln, and they are going to be riding the hype train here throughout the season. Nebraska is for real. Dylan Raiola this, Dylan Raiola that, and I'd be really on board with Nebraska being a big-time power and maybe even a contender in the Big Ten. But it wasn't that. This is a Nebraska football team that didn't play their best, most complete 60-minute game so far. Of course, we only know their first game is against UTEP. This is a team that has a long way to go, but I certainly believe that Nebraska can play a better, more complete 60-minute game than what we saw on Saturday night. But this is maybe a game in the past where these things happen. Maybe Nebraska turns the football over a little bit more. Maybe they even end up on the short end of the stick. But they protected the football. They did what they needed to do. There is something to be said. When you don't play your best, but you still win convincingly, that tells me that this Nebraska program is certainly headed in the right direction. I'm not quite ready to maybe crown them as this Big Ten dark horse, right? That's going to maybe get to that 9-win level or a 10-win level. I predicted them to win 8 games in the preseason. So it's still wait and see. But I will say this, an 18-point spread when this one is all said and done, that final score really doesn't tell the whole story. I think the difference between these two teams is a lot bigger than 18 points. All right, let's get into my takeaways in this particular matchup. Man, it's all about the trenches. I personally believe that great college football teams are built from the inside out. And the inside is what made the difference in this particular football game. Colorado's offensive line was not very good, and I think that's putting it kindly. And if you followed Colorado the last 2 seasons, and you've watched film on them, and you saw what happened at parts during that game against North Dakota State, and then you've followed what Nebraska and Tony White has been defensively, specifically on the defensive line, right, last year and then the beginning of this year, this should be absolutely zero surprise to you, the domination that Nebraska had up front. I mentioned in my preview. I thought they were going to eat all night long, and that's exactly what happened. They got pressure, and they shrunk the pocket on Shedeur Sanders. Now, when they were able to do that, these long developing plays, these long developing routes in their pass game, because that was the one bullet in the holster that I talked about during my preview. Okay, the one thing that Colorado was very dangerous at and that could give Nebraska problems was the combination of guys like Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter down the field and the explosiveness in that combination. Guys like Jimmy Horn as well on the other side. But when the pocket continues to shrink, when Shedeur Sanders is continuously hit, right, it makes it a lot more difficult for those routes to develop down the field. The problem with Colorado, when they face better teams, when they get into conference play in the Big 12, is if they can't protect Shedeur Sanders, it takes that one bullet out of the holster. They can't get those big plays down the field. Now, Colorado did hit some 15 to 25-yard gains as this game went on, but I thought Nebraska, with their pass rush, with their coverage, they did a really good job at containing those plays, because you look at this game, Colorado didn't have a run game. Colorado didn't have an offensive line. And then you look at Nebraska, and man, I love this defense. You saw how much they improved last year under Tony White. Now you fast forward to this season, and you can tell they're just so experienced with a year under their belt in this system. This is a defense they can be top 10 in the country. This is a defense they could be one of the very best in the Big Ten, which being one of the very best in the Big Ten shouldn't be surprising to anybody. I think they were certainly in that discussion preseason. But man, when you're able to shut down a combination like they did, I predicted in my preview that, yeah, they were going to be really good up front. But, man, maybe they were a little bit more dominant than even I expected throughout this game. I predicted the final score to be 35-20 in favor of Nebraska. I thought Colorado would get scoring plays down the field, but, man, there was just so much domination in that first half. By the time the second half really came around, it was just too little too late for the Colorado Buffaloes. Let's talk about complementary football in this game, because that's kind of another big story. I talk about teams being built from the inside out and how trenches can really determine how successful of a football team that you will become. You also need to be complementary. When I look at Nebraska, right, you look at the defense complementing the offense. Even when you really zero in on the defense, the pass rush complementing the coverage, right? Because if you're able to get a really good pass rush to get to the quarterback, that makes things easier, certainly, in coverage, and they can do certain things on the back end. And it goes the other way as well, right? If they're able to cover well, that gives more time for the pass rush to be able to get there. And you saw that within this football game. Defense to offense, you look at run game to pass game. Look, there's a lot of balance on this Nebraska team. I think they can do it in a variety of ways. And you look at the other side for Colorado, I keep mentioning that bullet in their holster, that one bullet in their holster that I mentioned during the preview, right? Those deep, explosive pass plays and getting things involved from Shadur to Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn. When that bullet is not there, you see what you saw for Colorado. This is a team that is not good in the trenches, right? The offensive line and the defensive line. Defense as a whole, right? Outside of that one bullet in their holster, they struggle. If you take that out, even in the Big 12 this season, okay, I think that this is a Colorado team. If defenses look at this game film and what Nebraska was able to do, and they attack that weakness, this is a Colorado team that, you know, I thought preseason they were a 5-7 win team. All right, and they might kind of float in that territory, right, if they can't shore up what they have on the offensive line over there. So I thought Dante Dowdle was great in the run game, right? I know he had some fumbles last week, and this is a very deep running back room, but his ability to run the football, I think, opened up some passing concepts down the field, although I thought they'd be a little bit better throwing the football down the field in this particular game, but still, okay, you came out with a victory. You still looked really, really good, but there certainly are some things to improve on. All right, let's get to my last takeaway, and boy, this second half was stagnant. This was not good for Nebraska because they're putting up 28 points in the first half, and they are looking really good. Everything is going their way, and this looks like a Nebraska team that could be for real. And then the second half happens. Now, I think a big part as to why they were stagnant is because of penalties. Now, before I get into really how maybe some penalties affected some of these offensive drives in the second half, this is something that I usually don't talk about. This is something that I usually don't say in my reactions and my Big Nation shows as well. These refs were pretty bad. Okay, they called back potential touchdowns, big plays for Nebraska in the second half that were just phantom calls. And then there was a roughing the passer penalty, right, where I think it was B.J. Green contacted Dylan Raiola. That was a roughing the passer penalty that gave Nebraska a first down. That was a phantom call as well. Some of these reviews, right, I think in the first half and the second half really were confusing at some points in time. So this was certainly not a model performance by the guys in stripes. But I also want to say this as it pertains to penalties. You got to clean things up, because although there were some phantom calls, there were, you know, some certainly warranted penalties from this Nebraska team. When you have a team in that position, okay, I wanted to see Nebraska come out with that killer instinct and put this game away. Honestly, when I look at the talent level of these teams, this is probably a game that should have ended up 35-10. Maybe even 42-10, which would have just been 2 touchdowns in the second half for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. That, I believe, is a realistic distance from what these two teams really showed. The penalties and the conservative play calling. Now, I will say this, when you get behind the sticks that much, you kind of run And they, considering where they were in the game, they didn't feel like, when you get to a 3rd and 13 or a 2nd and 15, something like that, hey, when you're up by 3 scores, when you're up by 4 scores, you feel like, hey, we don't need to push the football down the field. Let's run the football, maybe a better position to punt the football away, get better field position, so to speak, for our defense. So I can maybe see it leaning into that as well, and maybe it was more about the penalties than the conservative play calling in the second half. But you want to see this team be better. You want to see this team finish more. If Nebraska is going to be into that conversation, right, if they win, right, these next group of 4 games, right, that they will probably be favored in almost every single one of these games, if not all 4. Okay, if they are going to run the table and then you face a team like Ohio State, you need to be able to finish. You need to be able to build that confidence throughout 60 minutes of a football game. Because if they had that killer instinct and they played a clean second half, I think I'd be sitting here saying, Nebraska's for real. Nebraska is a really good team. But now I'm kind of sitting here saying, I feel like they're a really good team. I just need to see a complete performance against a good power conference team. Now, they play an FCS opponent next week. I mentioned that conference slate, the Illinois, the Purdue's, the Rutgers, teams like that I expect them to win those games, but we'll see what happens down the stretch as well. Overall, I think this was a good performance. Maybe not necessarily a great or an elite performance. I thought their defense did what I expected them to do. I wanted to see a little bit more from the offensive side of the football. A couple of shout-outs I want to give to a couple of guys right now. Ja'Cory Barney, man, the freshman, when he gets the ball into his hands, you kind of hold your breath a little bit, right? Because he is a playmaker. I want to see him get the football better. And Dante Dowdle running downhill. He fumbled a couple of times in that UTEP game. They gave him the opportunity in this particular game. This is a very deep running back room. I like the way Dowdle and his power balanced with the speed and the quickness and elusiveness, receiving ability of Ramir Johnson. I mean, you still got Gabe Irvin Jr. You still got Emmett Johnson, right, in that running back room as well. So depth. Depth is a big thing and the big difference maybe between these two teams, between the Nebraska Cornhuskers and the Colorado Buffaloes as well. Big win. We've now gotten past this for Nebraska. I want to hear your thoughts. How good do you think the Nebraska Cornhuskers are? After the first half, I thought, man, this team is really good. Second half, maybe a couple more doubts are creeping into my mind. I want to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments below about all things Nebraska Cornhuskers. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.